Today, we're diving into one of Norway's most baffling and tragic mysteries, the disappearance of Astrid Aardal. It's a case that has it all: a woman who vanishes, a confession that seems to solve everything, and then a shocking acquittal that just throws it all into chaos.
I mean, really, think about that. How does that even happen? This is the central puzzle of the whole story. So let's get into this incredible case where the truth really does feel stranger than any fiction you could imagine.
So let's go back to the beginning. We're in Bergen, Norway, in the winter of 1958. And what the public was told was a pretty straightforward, if a little scandalous, disappearance. A 44-year-old hairdresser named Astrid Aardal disappears. Gone. The story that hits the newspapers paints a very specific picture. She's run off and she's taken a whole bunch of money from her business with her. Okay, so that's the story everyone heard. The rumor was that she'd fled with a ton of cash and a young Hungarian waiter. But the reality? It was a totally different story, a financial one. Astrid hadn't run off with money. People owed her money. Specifically, her landlord, Sigurd Hollekim, was in debt to her for thousands. Now, that little detail got kind of buried in all the gossip. But trust me, it's going to become the heart of this entire case. And then, nothing. For 5 whole years, the case just sat there cold as ice. No new leads, no body, no answers at all about what actually happened to Astrid Aardal. And then, completely out of the blue, a development that nobody, and I mean nobody, saw coming. 5 years after she vanished, Astrid's landlord, the same Sigurd Hollekim who owed her money, walks right into a police station and confesses to her murder. And we're not talking about some vague, I think I did something bad kind of confession. No, this was chillingly specific. He laid it all out, step by step. He said he lured her into his barn. He killed her with a sledgehammer, and then he burned her body on this huge bonfire and scattered her ashes, trying to get rid of every last trace. It felt like a truly horrible but solved case.
And the confession didn't just point to him. His wife, Elsa Hollekim, was also arrested and charged with being an accomplice. So in an instant, this case went from a cold missing persons file to this gruesome murder plot that was supposedly carried out by a husband and wife.
All right, so confession in hand, case closed, right? Well, not even close. In this story, the confession was actually just the beginning of this incredibly cruel and calculated smokescreen that ended up destroying another man's life. So, while the police were running with this confession, totally focused on Sigurd and Elsie Hollekim, something else had been bubbling up under the surface in their community for years. A nasty, relentless rumor mill had been pointing the finger at a completely different man, a local builder named Mikael Myking. For a while, police even looked at him because the gossip was so strong. And that man was Mikael Myking. This quote from him just says it all. The rumors were devastating. He was ostracized. His business was ruined. His entire life was wrecked by these whispers that painted him as a murderer. For years, his own neighbors, his own community, thought he was the one who killed Astrid Aardal. And here's the most sinister twist of all. Where did these life-ruining rumors even come from? They came from the Hollekims themselves. On the very night Astrid disappeared, Else Hollekim was frantically calling Mikkel Myking's wife, asking if he was home. Later on, she straight up told people that she had a special suspicion about Myking. The very people who ended up being charged with the murder had spent years actively framing someone else. So all of this just explodes in what has to be one of the most unbelievable trials in Norwegian history. A trial where the confession itself became the main event. So you can just imagine the scene in court, right? The prosecution thinks they've got this in the bag. I mean, their main piece of evidence is the defendant's own detailed confession. But the defense lawyer, a legend named Alf Nordhus, he decided to do something really bold. He argued that the confession was a total lie. And the defense team just started taking this confession and ripping it to shreds, one detail at a time. They showed that the barn ceiling was actually too low to swing a sledgehammer the way Sigurd described. Then a story about what he did with the body kept changing. First he burned it, then suddenly he'd buried it at the local airport. They searched the airport, nothing. Even the financial motives started to look a lot weaker than the prosecution was claiming. And then the defense lawyer, Alf Nordhus, he throws out this really powerful idea to the jury. He says, look, an innocent person might confess for a lot of reasons, maybe to protect someone else, maybe for the attention, or maybe because of some deep, twisted sense of guilt. He basically planted this huge seed of doubt, and unbelievably, it worked. In a decision that just stunned the entire country, the jury acquitted both Sigurd and Elsa Hollekim. The man who confessed to murder was declared not guilty. He just walked free. But look, an acquittal isn't an answer. It solved nothing. If anything, it just blew the case wide open again, leaving this void of questions that still haunt this story today. And the loose ends from this trial, they are just maddening. Astrid's body has never been found. During the trial, his wife, Else, said this bizarre thing to him in court. She said, "Now you have to say the truth, not the one we contended to cover over any other." Years later, her lawyer claimed he knew who the real killer was, but he was bound by confidentiality. And maybe weirdest of all, Sigurd, even though he was acquitted, never asked for compensation. He just said, "The state has had enough expenses on me." And that's the question that just hangs over this entire case, isn't it? If Sigurd Hollekim's confession was this elaborate lie, this whole performance, who was he protecting? And from what? We're left with no body, no confirmed killer, and a story that's either the perfect crime or just a tragic, incomprehensible mess of lies.